tourists here in Busoga who can also enjoy the water in the vicinity. Archaeologically, we have not yet done much, even when we have seen a few archaeological artifacts that tell us some stories of what happened on the site and which stories we can sell to our tourists. Then still on slavery, when he was still fully under tourism, even now he's still under tourism because he has a museum. And this is one, of course, of our iconic sites in northern Uganda. Of course, we are talking about the regional balancing as we think of promoting central, let's east, or even as we think of diversification. We can move as you go to Makshon, then you can extend and visit Pavungu, you visit the Alul Kingdom, you cross and go to Acholi land. So most of us, we have heard about Sir Samuel Baker and how he also fought slavery. The history of Fort Patiko is long. It begins with the Arabs in 1840s buying slaves, and even how the local people, when even before then, when you read about Fort Patiko or the Patiko itself, we shall again in future be connecting it to Gulugulu Hills, whereby the war amongst the people from Fort Patiko and the Gulugulu that later brought in the 1911 war came in. Those two places, they first fought amongst themselves because these people at Patiko had accepted slaving, selling their neighbors, and yet the people of Gulugulu Hills were not interested in that. And so there were some, intertribal wars that later brought in a bigger war where the British had to, of course, we have the memorial of the current or recent atrocities of the LR, is it? National, not national, the LR Lord's Resistance Army. Here we have Balonio Memorial Site, where more than 300 people were killed in a bad or in a way that one cannot fathom. Balonio, the ministry has repaired those memorial graves and has done records of what happened, have worked with communities and developed, with the support from the Norwegians, developed an interpretation center where these communities come and celebrate every 16th March. Go there and learn. And of course, why do we do this? We do not want these things to happen again. And therefore, we say that museums and heritage sites are places whereby we have peace, we have memories that can bring forth peace, and a reason UNESCO, when they talked after the Second World War, before they formed UNESCO or the convention came into place, they felt of things that can bring peace in the whole world. And so culture, preservation of culture, people meeting, we know that we have our storytellings on our culture stoves, when we are still using the stones as our stoves. A lot of things were then told to our youth,
And so among the things that we think that UNESCO looked at when they talked about preservation in the 1972 Convention of Cultural Heritage, partly was to bring people on these sites and a way of promoting peace. And I talked about the archaeological sites. This is now Kibiro in the western Hoima. Kibiro salt producing village is a fascinating site whereby women have been producing salt for the last 1,000 years. And this site is on the tentative list of UNESCO World Heritage, and these are some of the questions they were asking, that why 20 years on the tentative list? Why is it that Uganda is not doing its part to ensure that this beautiful heritage is known by the world? That is the question, or something we can discuss later. We have our Bigo Byamjenyi. Many of us, we are aware that when even the president is talking in his speech and about tourism, he can't forget to mention about Bigo Byamjenyi. This is, of course, we have Bigo Byamjenyi and Tutsi, which are places where our Chwezi or some of the dynasties that occurred, or where our history of the Longhorn cow began from, because we are talking about 11th century or 10th century to 15th century. And so when we were discussing with somebody and said that, you see, the Longhorn is being auctioned millions of rands in South Africa and even to the other country abroad. But for us who have it for the last, from the 2nd millennia AD, we do not really promote it. So you see that these are, of course, trenches. There is the inner trench for Bigo and the outer, with different values and attributes that we can learn from and enjoy, and also tell our future generations. The PS talked about developments, and we are trying to develop a master plan for Bigo Byamjenyi. The ministry is trying to acquire land for private sector developments, and you will see that, I don't know if this can point, but there is a circle somewhere there where we are putting a proposed location for the long cow breeding. We are aware that there are some Banyankole team who are trying to make sure that this longhorn cow does not die, and we think it's also one of the mandates of Ministry of Tourism to ensure that, since we have some of these sites where we think that this longhorn cow originates, we preserve from there. Then we have sites like Mugaba Palace. Mugaba Palace, I think our architect Katatumba at the end can talk about it, but this palace hosted two kings, that is Gasyonga and King Kahaya, and the Ministry of Tourism has done that renovation, state of art, of course, fence. The fence has a mimic of the cow feeding into a trunk. And of course, the landscape, we are in phase 3 of this development. and we plan to work with private sector to ensure that this site gets is on a map, and even to ensure that it is well managed and sustainably, I would say sustainably managed. We have different sites. We have rock art. I think the previous presenter mentioned about rock art. The PS mentioned about rock art. We are working on the nomination of rock art sites in the Lake Victoria region, and we think that as we nominate more sites to the World Heritage, it's a way of attracting our international tourists. I agree about localization of tourism products, heritage resources, whereby we plan to do domestic tourism, but of course, because our domestic tourism is not yet that there, as we develop these products, we need also to consider our international tourists and create things. For example, if a site is nominated on the World Heritage, of course it goes on an international website whereby tourists will want to come and see that new thing that has been put on the World Heritage. And therefore, that is why we are trying to see that we work with our counterparts from Kenya and Tanzania to ensure that we nominate our rock art. We have numerous fantastic sites in Mutanda, in Kisoro, other sites in Uganda, Central Region. We have our Well Triangle, graves, and so I can talk and talk, finishing the 600 sites, but I just wanted to give highlights of what we want to plan for, or what we have in the next 5 years. I want to mention to this, to you people in the house, that in the previous presenter mentioned about a master plan, but the Ministry of Tourism, through funding from World Bank and ZFAF, we are working on a strategic plan for the museum, and whereby, of course, it is focusing on the National Museum and key heritage sites, which I have talked about. And when we call you again now to discuss the strategic plan, please return. Thank you very much, MC. Here ends my presentation.
We talk about heritage and development. We are thinking about the ways in which heritage can help us generate, promote tourism and generate money. In fact, when the minister was speaking, his question here was very clear. He said, what is the value of sites? Do they bring money? Do people appreciate them? And so if these sites are not bringing in money, are they of much value? Of course, in our situation, things even get a little bit more complicated because of the compartmentalization of cultural heritage and natural heritage. And so when people talk about natural heritage, there is a lot to see. It's more exciting to go to the national parks. And when they talk about cultural heritage, then people are thinking, where do I go? If I want to see Uganda's cultural heritage, where is it anyway? And of course, the catastrophe that befell our only cultural heritage site on the World Heritage List, which is Kasobi Tombs, doesn't make matters any better. And so the emphasis on heritage as a driver of economic development and the specific emphasis on tourism also shows us how vulnerable or how fragile the whole aspect of tourism can be. And of course, we don't need to think very hard. We all know the degree to development. We only think about the touristic angle. Then I think, again, we just demonstrate how vulnerable we are. So I propose that we need to think about other aspects of development. How else, apart from tourism, how else can we use our heritage so that we can be able to achieve different aspects of the SDGs? Is there a way that we can use our heritage to promote good health? Is there a way that we can use, we could do that, of course, by addressing some of those practices that might actually endanger health. And this usually is very common when we have epidemics. Then we just realize how dangerous some of the cultural practices might actually contribute to the spread of the pandemic. And then if we talk about food security, again, are there ways in which we can use our heritage to ensure food security? Are there ways in which we can use it to build peace? And so these are some of the questions that I just have at the back of my mind as I was reading to talk about this. Now, although heritage is considered important in the realization of sustainable development, we note that it is directly mentioned only once. When you look at the SDGs themselves and the targets, you see that heritage is mentioned only once, that is target 11.4, which aims to strengthen the efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. And so that kind of ends there. So the question for me then is, how can we move from these very general and seemingly blank statements and bring them down close to reality, to where we are, and see those things that can actually speak directly to us? And this is, again, one of the things that I hope I can speak to in this. The other common narrative in the world of heritage, especially cultural heritage, is usually the emphasis on protection, conservation. We have to protect it jealously and all that, which is important. We have to protect our heritage because it is irreplaceable. We cannot get something else to replace the heritage. But then, does mere protecting and safeguarding necessarily lead to sustainable development? This is, again, a question that I want to throw to you and hope that we can have a conversation around that during the Q&A. And so along that line, I think for me my point is that when we emphasize the conservation, when we emphasize the safeguarding, we make it seem as though it's a big burden on us to take responsibility for protecting and safeguarding the heritage. And what I propose is that we need not to look at that as a burden. Rather, we need to be looking at ways in which we can use our heritage as some form of asset or cultural capital around which we can innovatively come up with ideas to address different issues that concern us in society. And so I would be interested in looking at ways in which we can link the protection and safeguarding of heritage to broader challenges like poverty eradication, like environmental sustainability, peace and security, and of course, gender equality. And these are key to me because they are some of the pillars of sustainable development. And so we shouldn't just be thinking in terms of the monies that might be coming in, but rather in terms of addressing some of these practical concerns. So taking gender equality and empowerment of women as an example, what can we do? How can we use our heritage to see that we promote gender equality and to see that we promote the empowerment of women? Of course, again, this is a bit of a long conversation because recently I think there are new debates that are saying, oh, you used to talk about the girl child being disadvantaged, but if we don't wake up, it is the boy child now who is being threatened. And so when we talk about empowerment of women, maybe it is also selfish. Maybe we need to think about also empowering some of the men. Of course, most of you here are empowered, but there are also those men that actually need empowerment. And so I think that in thinking about gender equality, of course, we need to have a diverse understanding of gender so that it is not the simplistic thing that most people tend to take gender to mean women, and so if they're talking about gender, it's about women, women, women. Of course, it's not that. And yet, we know that most of our heritage tends to discriminate women. So there are different heritage places that have restrictions. You know, you go to the site and they say the women are not allowed this side. I've not heard of sites where they only allow women and not men. Maybe they are there, but my experience has been more the women are not allowed here, or the women are not allowed here if they are having their menses, or the women are not, you know, there's all this sort of discrimination against women. And so my proposal is that we need to look at, you know, the concerns of both men and women, and that we should involve them in the discussions around what we can do with our heritage to achieve sustainable development. In other words, we shouldn't let somebody else impose on us decisions externally. We should look at the reality on ground, and we should be able then to use a bottom-up approaches where we can then devise ways, for example, of how we could use heritage to address gender-based violence, to address issues relating to disease and ensuring health living. I could also say something a little bit about environmental sustainability. And here I would say that, of course, environmental protection and natural resource management are very key. But I think the underlying principle that we need to consider is that we should, you know, whichever way we talk about environmental protection, we also need to think about the principle of social justice. And social justice here, especially in regard to the neighboring peoples, to the neighboring communities. I like that Jackie was highlighting most of, or many of the heritage places that they are, you know, currently trying to develop, to put on the map. Of course, some of them are more developed than others, but that in doing this, even as the donors bring in a lot of money and the ministries, or officials from the ministries, outsource people to go and develop these places, you need to think about the principle of social justice, so that we are thinking about the communities, but at the same time, we are also thinking about protecting the environment. And so all this can really not be realized if we do not consider the cultural and historical contexts and the communities that benefit from this environment. And so just thinking about heritage then and sustainable development, I have sort of few suggestions to make, and one is, I'm kind of repeating myself, which is really to integrate issues of heritage into sustainable development challenges. We need to think about the challenges that we face and then see how we can use or adopt heritage as a space through which we find solutions to some of our contemporary challenges. In other words, how do we go beyond talking about these big terms in places like here today to actually taking them to the reality on the ground where we are talking about poverty issues? And poverty reduction, again, I would like to say that yes, tourism must be reconsidered so as to bring benefits to the communities. Because sometimes, yes, we're talking about the tourism, but at these heritage sites, who is actually benefiting from the returns that accrue from the tourism? Is it the members of the communities immediately, or is it somebody else? And so I think that if we think of ways of linking the heritage to the local businesses, whether they're craftswomen, individual entrepreneurs, whether you think about artists and people performing in different ways, that can help us to get to a point where at least each one is getting a little bit of something, as opposed to widening the gap between those who have access and those that do not have anything completely. Of course, I have talked about the gendered approach as being very key, and so I think my emphasis here is that whatever we take at these heritage places, let's not be gender blind. Let's think about what the different groups of people need. If you get a donor who is giving you money to train the women, then what skills do the women want? Please ask them, do not decide for them. And of course, we cannot get to a point where we attain gender equality in heritage if the men are not involved and if they don't take responsibility. So my brothers, we need you with us to be able to achieve some of these aspirations. And then maybe lastly, as I've been given the warning, of course, I just want to say, one is that heritage is very political. It's not an innocent thing lying there. It's highly contested. And so sometimes if you're not careful, you're going to find the most powerful appropriating the heritage and using it for their own interests. And this is one of the things, again, as heritage managers that we want to try to avoid or want to try to mitigate. And so we have to be aware of that. And then the other thing also that I wanted to highlight is, yes, we talk about development, heritage and development, but I would argue that we should not use this language or this narrative to justify environmental degradation. And so here again, like Pasco did highlight, we have to think about how we balance between, for example, the depletion of resources. If we think about, let me take the example of people who make crafts in Uganda, for example. And I think that this is a group of people who have been very innovative, because once they realize that some of the plant materials are running out, they've innovatively opted for alternate materials that they use in these industries. And so I think what again we realize here is that the local communities are very innovative in considering alternatives because they have the knowledge, they have the skills. And maybe lastly, again, I can say we need to think about the environment, because we cannot talk about sustainable development without thinking about the environment. So through heritage, we can be able to provide innovative approaches that mitigate change, climate change, and related disasters. Most times when these disasters happen, we move from here because we are at the center of power and think that we are the ones to take the solutions to the people. But in reality, the people who are affected have the indigenous knowledge and a better understanding of the calamities more than ourselves. And we can benefit from their knowledge, from incorporating them, so that we are able to avoid some of these disasters, or where they happen, so that we can be able again to mitigate the ways in which these disasters affect people. So we need, we need, of course, yes, to work with the local communities. And maybe I can end here with just one question, which is that in the field of heritage, it's very common for almost all the heritage professionals to talk about the local communities. But who constitutes this local community? I think that is something that we need to unpack. It's not enough for us to go and pick 1, 2, 3 people from a certain community and then claim that, yes, the community participated, the community was there. Sometimes the community is not participating, it's actually being participated. And so I think that these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share. Thank you very much, MC, and I apologize for using more time than you had allocated me.
This is an African perspective that he gave, and he emphasized on development of heritage for the well-being of the society, as I alluded unto it, because it's in our constitution, whereby we say that we protect, preserve these heritage resources, and so he said that it should be a concern for all. Protection, conservation, and sustainable management of heritage resources should be a concern for all, not only the government, but our stakeholders, our communities, all of us should be involved. We should be aware that, and this is what I normally tell our stakeholders, the districts or local governments, that of course we are aware that heritage resources are not yet devolved, or they are not yet decentralized. The function of museums, the function of heritage conservation is not yet decentralized. And so it is still at the center. And being at the center, of course, I would say that we have been lacking capacity built in terms of human resource. And so, of course, trying to work with local government to ensure that we have these sites protected. And so he mentions that it is a concern for all. And so he also said that community development is caring of heritage and well-being of society. If you want to have a community happy, for example, develop rock art or the tombs of Kisoro, the royal tombs, the burial grounds of the kings who were buried in the caves in Kisoro, then the community around, of course, will benefit in one way or another. And so, of course, we are aware that heritage resources contribute to tourism. Most of us who have moved, for example, to Robben Island, we've seen people even fly to Robben Island and and then going to see where Mandela slept, the prison for Mandela. I myself, I have been there for at least for some time because I had my studies from that side. And I have been to, we've gone to rock art sites, for example, the rock art sites in Namibia, whereby people travel thousands of kilometers going to see Fontaine, which is listed on the World Heritage List. And so, of course, the communities around there, when these sites are developed, when they are mapped, developed, then they benefit from this. So, a question was, how do heritage contribute to tourism? And then he said that among the things that we should look at is to build domestic tourism, to build a resilience, making our product, being resilient, he made a refer to COVID-19. There are countries like Norway whereby their tourism is basically local tourism. I think a person like Johnson can give more highlights, because and local tourism in Norway is basically culture related, going to those step churches, looking at the historical buildings where the Germans landed first when in Bulgaria when they were conquering the Norwegians. This is a World Heritage Site, and of course you find that mostly is going to tell us about, if you look at Africa, we have most sites which are very beautiful but less on the World Heritage List. In Europe and America, you find that there are basically historical buildings, fortifications, very few, but more on the World Heritage List. So the question is, between all of us as stakeholders, what can we do also to move and have more than what we have, to be seen by our local people and the international community? He talked about balancing between conservation and development. And in this, we have had, of course, as ministry, as a department, challenges whereby you find a road needs to be constructed, they need a rock art to construct a road. A rock art is important to the community, it is important to our country, to the international country, if it is listed on the World Heritage. But we have been intercepting different projects whereby you find that they want to use these sites for development. But now, not saying that the Ministry of Tourism does not want these projects to go on, but how do we strike a balance and we ensure that as we do our environmental impact assessments, as we do what we are supposed to do in our different capacities, we ensure that, we are sustainably, all of us focusing on one thing. We want to make sure that World Bank 4.11, it is the one that talks the operational guidelines. It really talks about having the sites protected for development than them being destroyed. Finally, I mentioned about this. He talked about having a master plan for tourism, which we have. I know we have a master plan for tourism, which is ending in 2024. But I mentioned that as the Department of Museums, we are also developing a strategic plan. And also, he talked about a national committee, which is on the agenda, and this one I think will be discussed. He also talked about building bridges in and for heritage in Uganda. And so, of course, building these bridges, he mentioned about the sustainability. How best can we have products or heritage resources that can be sustainably managed and developed for the betterment of all Ugandans. Then he talked about, of course, the issue of us in museums whereby we say this is a non-profit-making institution. I do not know if Mr. Semagote is a non-profit-making institution, but as a national museum, of course we have been talking about this, but he talked about a paradigm shift whereby, because if you do not make any profit, it means you cannot sustainably manage some of these things, and probably could be one of the reasons why we are seeing some of these challenges that we have not solved for some time. So this is not for us at the department or at the ministry, but it is all of us to think about how best, what business models, and that's why I said that we shall call you again when we think of, telling you what the consultant has done in developing these different strategies, so that we see what models can we use to sustainably manage our museums and our heritage sites. Then he also talked about what kind of acceptable developments that can be made. We are talking about, for example, Bigobyamteni. I need to inform the stakeholders around that, of course, there are developments which you can't make on a site. That's why we have to have guidelines, of course. There are things which you cannot build on top of a certain attribute of a site that we think that is very important. So we have to, that's why we are talking about sustainable managing, having these attributes kept in place and the values so that we pass them to the future generations. Then finally, of course, he talked about involvement, and this is something which we have in Uganda: youth, women, PWDs, the elderly, to ensure that everybody is involved. I think that is the summary I managed to make. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe we could have said having conversations with the public, because I believe all these people here, everyone has a perspective which is definitely rich, but definitely you are the people with the mandate to make policy, and I am going to talk about it later, replying to your question. I'm very happy the way the MC is driving us. He's given us a very important question, is how do we create value through heritage? My own view, I was just reading the paper. There is an online paper on the Guardian of, I think, this week or today. They were saying to be able to succeed with conservation in Africa, we must decolonize it. Because these guys came here, whether they were selfish or not, they certainly were looking at things from their own perspective. And what was not understood was that the people who lived here also had a perspective. So what was that perspective? And this is what I would like to comment upon. The first thing is, we are not here by mistake. The people living in this part of Africa, there is a reason they are here. And any talk about heritage cannot leave out the geolocation of our community, Uganda. Why is Uganda the part of Africa? There's something that I found uniquely absent in all the presentation. Nobody is talking about our place on the earth and the equator. All these things here, the tall trees, the mountains, they have a bearing in the sun, the energy from the sun, the weather, the lakes, the rivers, the salt we are talking about, the national parks, the animals. You cannot talk about them and forget the sun. And today we are talking about sustainability in form of energy. We are one of those few locations on planet Earth with an equal divide of day, light, and sun, night. And how you can generate power using the sun. The sun and its location and its heat is our heritage and its impact upon us. So, in my view, to succeed in this heritage protection and promotion, we need to do what, in my own words, I call a strategic analysis. What we have been presented to us here is good, but in my view, it's like we are picking what is convenient or what is possible. I hope not only inspired by donor money, but we could choose to look at what I would call the big picture. And I would think the role of the ministry in this is to enact policies. I was looking at the beautiful Mugaba Palace. As a person from Angola, we are grateful. But if you ask yourself, the private sector and government, who would have built a more inspiring structure? I'm only happy that my senior there was the architect. So my view is that government should enact policies, help us to get resources, and then the private sector should do the implementation. Of course, government also has an important role in regulation. Now, I'm trying to be brief. If we choose to do a strategic analysis, it's going to help us to enhance the value chain. So, of course, for government, the issue is going to be what policies all these people here will contribute. Then the linkage. There is a reason why those ports are along the River Nile. There is a reason why the port in Mayuge was around Lake Victoria. Transportation of slaves was easier. So once government has policies that can help us to link, then we should find integration. I liked the example Jackie gave about the Nordic countries. Tourism, apparently even in Europe, Spain has the biggest number of tourists. They don't come from America, they are from Europe. During the colder times, they come down to enjoy the sun. But we who are here in the sun, we are moving up, either to move for winter or to go to the east where the sun is hotter. Then measure it. What you cannot improve, what you cannot measure, you cannot improve. Some of these heritage sites and even efforts, important as they are, you ask yourself, are they what we should begin with, what we should bring in the middle, or maybe what should come later? And of course, over time, we have to do evaluations, and it is these evaluations that might tell us what improvements to make, necessarily through education. I want to bring in another contribution. When we are talking about heritage, we sometimes ignore that some of the greatest importations brought here include lifestyles. When I was young, I had the privilege of living with my grandparents. I never would understand why they were not taking sugar. I asked actually one time, I challenged my grandfather and said, "But aren't you so backward? How can something so sweet fail you?" He said, "When you grow up, you will see. Here I am on the 50, I can't even take sugar. Even 1 gram of sugar will cause me problems." So these guys brought lifestyles. Of course, now the gender people, before I raise in arms, there were foods not eaten by women. Women will not eat chicken, women will not eat eggs, women. But you ask the ladies who eat those things today. When you come to a certain age, you have issues. So although there is an agenda element, the correction of it must not be, let us all first kill ourselves and then we be equal. You can't be equal in death. We should look at our lifestyles. We should look at our education systems. For example, in all traditional languages, there is no word for unemployment. Why? Because if your father was a hunter, you also became a hunter. Actually, if you didn't become a hunter, they would regard you as a deviant. But they would go a long way to find something else for you. If your father was a traditional doctor, I don't want to mention which doctor, but you would also become a doctor. That is how, over time, traditional medicines, knowledge about them has been passed over time. And if we are talking about promoting heritage, how can we forget our flora, the plants? Wildlife, many times people think it is animals, but we probably have a far much richer heritage in plants. You remember yesterday when we were in COVID, how did COVID come about? And they say actually, that tree which gave us COVID, one of the places where it is most endemic is in this country. So let's extend the boundaries of what we've got as heritage to include the flora. The fauna, I think some good effort is already being made. I talked about the education system. Our education system is oriented to make us look to the exterior, not to the interior. It is so shocking how many of us Ugandans know the highest point in Uganda, how high it is. Even here, how many of us know the lowest point in Uganda? Recently, I was shocked to find out, you know the Luigi swamp? I am told it is the only swamp in Kampala and central Uganda that goes west. Luigi swamp drains into Lake Wamara. Of course, Lake Wamara is an extension of Lake Victoria. But that is not in our education system. So, even if we chose to go the way we are going, my expectation is that we have to engage, Jackie. We have to engage. If all the pupils in this country visited museums, you would not lack income. There is no policy requiring all visitors, government visitors, to visit the museum. When you go to Rwanda, they have one practice I liked. Even in this Choga, there were pictures of Prince Charles taking flowers to the genocide memorial site. And the last time I went to Rwanda, about maybe 10 years ago, to go there you pay $10, $20. And then you buy a bouquet of flowers, depending on your status. There are those of $100, there are those of $5. So if, for example, government had a policy, all foreign delegations, you have to visit a cultural site. In the 90s, I studied in France. In France, every Friday afternoon, there are no classes. They have a program they call Découverte de Millions. Every Friday, every foreigner is encouraged to go out and visit. You do home visits. I earlier mentioned that I'm trying out tourism. But there is a problem. I'm seeing my sister there using tourism. When you are trying to take people to the national parks and you look at the weekend, the nearest, the most practical national park is 7 hours drive from here. How can people go to Windy and be back in 2 days?
Summarize. Last comment.
I'm going to end on that one. What I'm trying to say is, let us break the boundaries of this discussion. Let us bring in everybody to give us perspectives. After we have looked at all this, we prioritize, we put what we think can come first, and what will come last. My prayer is that these conversations go on so that we can share as much as we can. But for the beginning, we are very, very grateful and to see Magongewa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Colleagues, if we don't wake up early enough, soon they will convince us that the human flesh is sweeter than the flesh of the other animals. Take it from me that some people have already been convinced that the married people passing in the front is very unsweet. You better go behind. So that's where our heritage is going. The second point I want to think about is an interpretation of our customs, rituals, and practices. Madam Professor Pamela talked about segregating women. Let's look at that time. What was the dressing code? What was the sanitation status? So that's why they denied these women, because of the sanitation and the dressing code. Remember, in Central Uganda, we have the playing of Omweso. Women were supposed to blow whistle because you have to squat while playing. Today they can play because they are putting on trousers. So, ladies and gentlemen, you must look at that one.
Thank you.
Finally, as we look at the high-profile sites, the low-profile sites are being demolished. So I beg that we engage the local government. We disseminate the 600 and so on sites earmarked the local government so that they can be able to safeguard some of these cultural sites. Finally, the very last one, as we are working on that site in Mayuge, you bypass another site in Chiterela where we have caves with bunkers, I mean with very strong walls. Believed to have been either storage places for slave trade or would have been used as prisons. They are there not yet documented, but with access from Cross Cultural Foundation of Uganda, Chikuru Cultural Museum is documenting about those caves. Please be a Ugandan, visit a community museum.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What I want to say here, all protocol observed. I really came to listen, to learn, because I can see Tony Mofongi there. I think Kevin's capacity as the government representative. We could probably get only two alone in this house. And I can tell you this, I was the first Prime Minister of Malou Kingdom, and I was a regent of Malou Kingdom. When Joe II of Malou died in 2000, I became one of the two regents. And in 2006, when our king came from the UK, after his studies, they made me the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister of the King was not appointed by the King. He's enthroned by the King. So I'm Prime Minister of the Kingdom, but a chief in my own right. And so I speak for the Kingdom from an authoritative point. And on this one, I chose to come because I went on sabbatical. When I became Prime Minister in 2010, I went sabbatical. Then things got tough, they called me back. So I'm at 8 months in the job. So I decided to come for this seminar because I saw the concept needed me to internalize. Then next time I can send my ministers responsible for this document to come and follow up. And that's why I thank the organizers. I thank the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife. I thank the UNESCO who collaborated with the government of Uganda to involve our stakeholders in this. Then I want to say this. A lot of tourism, a lot of cultural heritage and not mixed tourism is going to West Nile, and particularly I'm looking for. You know, people think alone are just in maybe Apache and Zumbo. Let me tell you this. There are little people in Africa, about 5.8 million people. 7 counties in the DRC up to almost 40 people. We are actually bigger than Uganda in population. There are little people actually bigger than Uganda. And this is the fact. In population at Uganda, we don't measure, don't go to more than 5 million in Uganda. And then Uganda. In Congo, we have 7 counties with over 4.3 million people. We go up to Bunia, the biggest municipality to Uganda. And that's why we're happy to promote now that East Africa, DRC has become part of East Africa. As soon as the protocol is ratified by immigration, we are going to have a lot of internal tourism and look people to Uganda. Because fortunately, the kingdom seat of Malur is in Uganda. And that's where the king sits, where I sit in my king. So all these people come and visit, and they come. But now with the immigration control movement. But when that protocol is ratified, there will be a lot of cross-border immigration by Alur people within Alur area, cultural area. Forget about the government. And so this information is important for us to document, and we share with our counterparts in the DRC, the good roads being built by the government, there is going to benefit Alur Kingdom action. And so we support it, because we know it has got economic value to support our kingdom, our national heritage, and then bring about the government. And today, as I say, ladies and gentlemen, I came here to listen, I came here to learn, and then with this kind of knowledge, I'll go back and constitute my own seminar on cultural heritage and sustainable development in the new perspective, and then integrate it with the national policy here. And lastly, Commissioner, thank you for inviting me. I think my niece working here noticed that the invitation was not extended much to stakeholders in the northern part of this country. Eunice, what's in with you? He looked at it and then she notified the organizers. And they called me pastor to come. Otherwise, you will notice that the northern part of this country is not involved in this conversation. And this conversation, we're not talking about Patiko, we're talking about the Bovumbu one way, where the Gibir and the Congo separated, which is now being developed by the Cross-Cultural Foundation. There's a gentleman from CCN, CCU in FA. Where you? Yeah, the development, yes, this gentleman. We are very busy developing this site, and we already proposed and suggested to be included in the administration for UNESCO to recognize it as a national heritage. Am I right? This proposal is there. I request, Commissioner, would you push for this so that the Buvumbu cultural sites, where to be in the Congo separated, the X there should be fast-tracked to become a national UNESCO heritage site. We have so many sites. In Zongo district, we have 27 sites. In Nebi district, we have 17 sites. In Pakwash district, along the line, we have 25 sites. And we have the oil and gas deposits in the Lankan area. That's our nation. That's also our heritage. And then we have also the tourism, the Mosquito Falls National Park area, which can be interlinked together with our cultural heritage. And then it becomes a hub for people who come and visit this country. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Opportunity to discuss heritage. I have 3 minutes. I must use 1 minute to tell you a story that everybody should go away with. Once upon a time, the Banyoro was stronger than the Baganda. The Baganda had to rely on the mercenary from Sese. And that mercenary flew all the way from Sese. And the Baganda gave him a name, Chibuka. Chibuka is the only person who's ever been seen flying the world over without a parakeet, without any document, without any item. And when the British, and those who are laughing, thank you. When the British came here, they exhumed his bones and they took them to Cambridge. And by imagining, they made the first plane. Without Chibuka, there will be no planes, or they wouldn't have been shaped like a human being flying. When those bones were brought back, they were put in old Kampala, Uganda's first museum. Somebody called for a human plant that museum. The British built the second museum in Makele. The Senegal bought the museum in Makele. And then they built, in 1958, the National Museum and took those bones there, and they're still there. The National Museum has a lot of lightning conductors to contain this guy called Kiwanuka. And this guy called Kiwanuka is what the British call Thor. Thor is a Ugandan, my friends. Those who didn't know. If you know Thor, the god of thunder, is a Ugandan. That's the guy who's been into this museum before. So this is a story that I find kind of unique, and I didn't understand before I went to museums. And see, your issue is heritage value. I'm seeing a confusion between whether this sector is going to be profit-oriented like many of us, or confused in socialism. We have to first resolve that. There are many people out here. I don't see my friend from Igongo. I don't know if the people from Igongo are here. These people, we are needing not only one thing, profit. The language in here is complaining that things are not working. But trust me, outside of this building, there's a lot of visitation to our museums. I don't know if there's anybody here from the NCDC and Ministry of Education. They have changed the curriculum, and these students have to visit our museums. Whoever is in here, please go and start a museum. 10 million children are visiting our museums and paying. So don't complain saying things are not working. Outside of this building, there's a segment that is going to sustain museums because of NCDC. In other countries, we should be clapping for NCDC and Ministry of Education. They are changing the curriculum, and students come to see physical things. So there are things which are actually working with that segment. 3 minutes is not a long time. It's not a long time, but the next time you have such a meeting, Let it not be us who are. My next shilling is surely going to come from either to operator like my colleague couples are bringing some white man who doesn't know that Moses in the Bible was a black man, or from a headmaster who's going to bring 400 kids. We are busy. Okay? Don't expect anybody who's really into heritage and earning their millions from heritage to sit here all day. Kindly, can the next meeting be after 6 and be online? And let it be not a meeting where we come and listen to government. The presenters have presented very good papers, but whatever they have said is true. It is not debatable, it is true. What is debatable, my friends, is how to create value. And the best people who know how to create value are people like Uganda, people like the tour operators who earn their next shilling from heritage. So kindly, can the next meeting be online and be after 6? Finally, where are we going? Digitization. I've closed social media because I can't handle the spiritual issues. There's an island where women can't go. It's called Israel, and I've taken a woman there, and it becomes dark. This is true. It's true. The people who are laughing, thank you for laughing. I know maybe your heads are full of just Arsenal and Man U, but we have heritage that when you tell it to people, they just laugh. When I tell people 4 is Uganda, they just laugh. That when I tell people that the gate park in Kui was the property of one woman called Kojeli, and Obama's village is named after that woman, and I want the gate park to have her story, it's unbelievable. And when you laugh, you're just underlining the fact that many of us do not actually know the heritage assets that we have here. So when you laugh, you inspire us to go on and tell these stories. Thank you for laughing and continue laughing. But at Sabah Museum, we're busy. We thank God for stopping this lockdown where we had almost gone broke. But things are happening outside here, Mr. MC. Thank you very much for the 3 minutes. I hope that the next meeting can discuss digitization such that a Japanese guy, and those of you who don't know, Japan is modified Uganda. That's a debate for another day. Japanese language is modified Uganda. I can demonstrate to another day. Such that a Japanese guy in Tokyo can visit Igongo, can visit Maisomaguru, and can visit Hamoka Samida in Kono online. That is where every museum owner is going. Thank you, MC, for allowing me 3.5 minutes.
Thank you. Coming by the gentleman before said, can museum become an authority? As of now, no. Because government is scaling down on its agencies, Cabinet had already approved the museum to become a directorate, and we have been working closely with the Ministry of Public Service to create a new directorate. That one now is also hanging because government has also taken a decision to scale down on directorate. So, as of now, we're just working to restructure the museum, to build capacity to enable it to have staff who can do more than what has been happening. Is there a national strategy to develop museums? Yes, there is, but it's not popularized, and I think we need even to refine it. The new law that has been passed by Parliament and is already assented to by His Excellency the President, there is a provision to cater for private museums, and there is a provision on how you can create museums. So when that law is finally disseminated, people will be able to see how you can expand private museums. Can museums be profitable? Yes, they can. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are here. One of the issues was, can you create value from heritage? And the answer should be yes. If people are going to invest, they should be able to generate some revenue. Is the museum preparing to reposition itself? Somehow, yes. We are trying to look at this and we want to see how the National Museum can become a national museum to oversee the other museums which we have. But we have some consultancies going on. We want to see how best this can be achieved. And maybe what I can ask the department is to engage with our stakeholders, the private sector and other players, so that we can also get their views on how best we can reposition. And this is something that we take on in earnest. We have no problem with that. I think basically that's what I can say for now. I can ask Jack now to comment.
Thank you, Under Secretary. I think, yes, he has mentioned most of the things, but there is some, I think, Mr. Commissioner Wesije, who talked about us including flora and fauna. Yes, in most of the, in our National Museum, we have flora and fauna, we have butterflies, we have plants. I would say right now we have Napa, which, if all goes well, should be going on the world, on the world geosite. It is going to be a world geosite, so it will be a UNESCO geosite, and we expect it to be launched in October. And Napa has fossil wood. It has, that's where we have the Uganda piscus major, and other plants and animals, which we, of course, there we are talking of conservation of fossil animals and plants. However, we have the dioramas. I have Mugume Amon, who is in charge of the natural history of the museum. In the natural history, we deal with plants and animals, and his work is conservation of natural history. But there is always a question in some of the debates in cultural heritage, or when you're doing heritage management, that you find that to ask to, for example, have an antelope conserved, if you're seeing it getting extinct, for it to be conserved, you must kill it and have this animal as its skin, and then create a diorama. And like what we have at Entebbe Zoo, they have put the dinosaur, okay? So we find that sometimes those things must happen, but it's already it's a debate of another day, and so we can always think about it. Then I think on the strategies, I mentioned that we are yet to come up with a strategic plan for the National Museum, majorly because World Bank looked at the National Museum, so they want us to see how it can be a self-sustaining entity. And so the project of which they have mentioned about, which the human resource mentioned about, of expansion of the National Museum, includes it's having a strategic plan, of which strategic plan, of course, we have some of the sites as looking at what strategies. And I mentioned that we shall invite you again, so don't get tired, to come and discuss what the report our consultants are coming up with. The marketing strategy, of course, he has talked about what we had in mind of having a directorate, which had been passed by Cabinet in 2017, but when we went back, they had now stopped. Now we are trying to see how best can we have two departments, one for museums and one for sites and monuments, so that we have more capacity, and maybe maybe we even have like a marketing officer who can work with UTB to ensure that we have our products well marketed. So those are some of the things we are thinking about. And we want to thank you, the Prince of Alul Kingdom. Your views, all of you, we are noting them down, and we shall make sure that we look again, and the minister mentioned, and the Commissioner of Museums and Monuments, that this is the first of its kind. This is the first dialogue. Yes, some people have said that should have been yesterday. We hope to have more dialogues and probably even engaging people at regional level. I give the UNATCOM to see.
Thank you. Let's have the next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Very quickly, just in passing, let me salute the Prince from Alul Kingdom. There was an MP called Anwaraj. He used to frequent our offices. Actually, he was on the parliamentary team that was always going to Paris to attend this conference throughout his term of office. So he was talking about some sites in his constituency. I'm told now he has not come back to Parliament. You better get in touch with him. He might hear me now. Because he was on the verge of submitting some lists, but he didn't do it. I just have one from the President. You call him President. Otherwise, I think what the Senate Chief has outlined is actually via the summary of what is the richness and the wealth in the museum. He has really elaborated it. But for the question on why some sites have taken long to be described, I think that was the question he asked. Okay, you mentioned the Ramsar sites. Now the Ramsar sites are different from the cultural sites we are talking about today. The Ramsar sites, at least they are working. It's a bit easier. The stage is softer. The Ramsar site, then followed by those other natural sites when you look at the other the other side. And I think what my sister has mentioned about Napak and so there's the other map we read. Most of those are geoparks. That it lies from Kadam, Mount Kadam, then Napak, Moroto Mountain, and that group, Morulongo, Morungole, and all that side. That is what I think she has mentioned. I think samples which is ongoing. I don't know whether the samples which are supposed to present from Karamoja, from OPM. As the person comes, the sample from OPM, I think, representing the Karamoja area, Francis Okori. Now, the issue of the 5 tentative lists, it's quite something, and that's one of the reasons we are here. So we can't answer it now until we are free together on the way forward. The procedure is long. Having been put on the tentative list, that was the first step. Or maybe let me say the second step. The first step was identifying them and then nominating them on the tentative list. And then now they're on the tentative list. Then the paperwork for each and every one of those sites have to be done. And it needs resources, money, manpower, and all that. And then once the paperwork done and submitted, and that means the ministry has to really mobilize, the ministry and all of us should mobilize sufficient resources. Then we need an assessment by the World Heritage Center, which has got what they call international advisory bodies. There is one that deals with purely cultural issues, there is one which deals with the issues of the natural world, there are others. So they have to come and assess and also give their report. And that is when, if their report is positive, finally the thing now take it. Then committee, an assessment by the. But if the report is still leaves some reservations, which has got, they will advise, advisory bodies, they have the following things you must address, must address, So that is how tedious the process is. And as I say that the reason they have to come and can resolve something if they are master of ceremonies. So the next time, as Mr. Seman will say, we now try the report is so I think